Hello, interweb. My name is Mr. Hosking, and I'm here to talk to you today about the French Revolution and Napoleon from 1789 to 1815. Before we get started, I'd like you to think about it a little bit. We have a picture here of Louis the 14th. He's known as the Sun King. And I'd like you to just take a minute to use your mind, pause the video, and try and figure out why you think Louis the 14th wanted to be known as the Sun King. Get that onto your notes, and when you're done with that, let's continue on forward. So today I'm going to speak specifically about the revolution and how it threatened the French king and the monarchy in France. To start, we have to look at how France was set up, and this is a great political cartoon. We can see there are three different groups of people in this political cartoon. There's this short nobleman riding in the front with a whip in his hand. Behind him there are two people from the clergy, a nun and a bishop. And then on the back, they're on a normal person, part of the third estate, the working class from the French society at the time. These represent the three different estates, the first estate being the nobility, the second estate being the monarchy, and the third estate being everyone else not born into the nobility or destined to join the clergy. So what this political cartoon is talking completely about is that 1% of the population is part of the church. They control 10% of the land and they pay 0% of the taxes. The second estate also is about 1% of the population. They control 20% of the land and they pay no taxes. So the top 2% of the population pays 0% taxes. The wealthiest people pay nothing in their tax system. That's converse to what the United States does, where the wealthiest people in our country pay the largest share of taxes. Here in France, the wealthiest people born into nobility or joining the clergy, they pay zero taxes, which means that everyone else, the 98% of everybody else in the third estate, they're heavily taxed. They're the ones that are forced to spend all of their money on the tax system. So when the king decides to raise taxes, he's not raising taxes on his friends, the people in the nobility, or he's not raising taxes on God or the people in the church. He's raising taxes on the people of France, and it hurts them the most. There are three specific forces of change that take place for the French Revolution to happen. The first one is what we just talked about in class when we talk about the philosophes, the new ideas of philosophes, and them realizing that they have this idea to use thought to decide what people deserve, that people have the right to life, liberty, and property. This is completely opposite to what a monarchy believes. A monarchy mostly believes in divine right, where they have the power from God to decide what should happen to a person. If God made me king, everything I think is right and everything you think is wrong. So you just have to do what I tell you to do. The philosophes changed that idea. The Enlightenment changes that. So now people are starting to think about monarchies in a different way. The second thing is going to be droughts and flooding destroys a bunch of the harvests in France, which means there's not enough food to feed everyone. The price of food goes up. Wealthy people can afford it, poor people cannot. So we see a lot of starvation, a lot of poor people unable to feed themselves and their families, and that makes people really, really unhappy. It also increases the taxes so that the wealthy people can afford to eat food still. How's the king getting money to buy food to feed himself and all of his friends? By taxing people. And who does he tax? Not his friends. He taxes the poor people and everybody else in this country of France that's not nobility, that's not the church, that are already struggling to eat. Now they have to pay more taxes and can eat even less. So this causes huge amounts of instability in France. It causes the poor people and the average people to really be angry with the monarchy and the nobility. The third force of change is going to be the Estates General. And to explain that, I made an entire slide all to its own. What the heck? is the Estates General. The Estates General is an assembly that represents people from those three different estates. The first estate, the monarchy, sent some people to represent them. The second estate, the clergy, they sent some people to represent them. And then the third estate, everyone else, they sent some people to represent themselves. And their job of the Estates General is to come up with ideas of how we can fix the financial problems of France and then present those ideas to the king. It was an advisory board. It had no power whatsoever in itself. But it does lead directly to the revolution. The third estate delegates get tired with the first and second estate. They realize no changes are going to be made. They realize the king is not going to listen to them, and they start to demand more rights for people in the third estate. So in the first deliberate act of the revolution, the third estates vote to establish the National Assembly, which would be a formal government, kind of like a parliament, that would have power and the ability to create laws and would hold the king in check. The king, of course, does not like this. He does not want to give up power, and he doesn't recognize the National Assembly. And that leads to July 14th, 1789, the overthrowing of the Bastille. And that starts the revolution. This is largely a symbolic move, the taking over the Bastille, but it does create some major problems for the king. What is the Bastille, and who cares? Great question. The Bastille is this drawing right over here in France. It was in the middle of Paris. It was a fortress originally created to defend Paris, but it was used by King Louis XIV and then his son and grandson as a prison. They would arrest political dissidents, people that were against the king or threatened the throne of the king. They would arrest them and they would put them in the Bastille. So the king used it mainly as a prison. So the storming of the Bastille in July really comes down to a symbolic move, as like the regular people being like, screw you, king, you don't have the power to arrest people. It's not you that has the power, it's us. So they come and they storm the Bastille and they free all of the prisoners as a symbolic move to say, hey, king, you don't have a lot of power. Not symbolically is that the Bastille was still considered a fortress, and it was filled with gunpowder and weapons and ammunition. So the people that are rising up against the king now have weapons that they can fight against the king's army and to actually like have a revolution. Now they're arming themselves by taking all of the weapons out of the Bastille. The third thing that they did was they used this as a symbolic movement. They tear down the Bastille, basically stone by stone. They ripped the Bastille apart, and it no longer exists. You can't go see the Bastille today. They tore the whole thing down. Then they took the stones, and most of them went into building a bridge at Pont de I don't know. It's in French. Who knows where it is? But it's a walking bridge, and the symbolism is that you're walking over the Bastille and the King's Bridge every day. You're walking on the King's rule. You're getting to stomp out the King. So it's a very symbolic movement to take over the Bastille, but not symbolically. They get all of these guns and gunpowder, and that helps them actually fight a revolution against the King. So this leads to the Great Fear in France. It's a senseless panic, and it goes through the countryside. The French people started going from noble manor to noble manor to these giant homes of the wealthy, with the belief that they were stealing food and they were storing food, and they had tons of food, and the average people had no food, and so the wealthy people were hiding all the food from everybody else. So they were senselessly starving. So they would go into somebody's estate, and they would tear through the estate, and they would set it on fire, and they would steal all of the silverware, and they would destroy the paintings, and they would kill the people that lived there, and kill the servants, and they would go look for the food, and then they wouldn't find any food. And they would say, well, you know what? They probably took it from this house and they moved it to the estate down the street. So let's go down there and do it. And they would go from house to house, destroying these beautiful estates and killing people and destroying valuable stuff and looting and pillaging, looking for food that they never found. It was a senseless panic, and there was never food that was hidden. We also see women march on Versailles. They attack Versailles, and that's what this picture is. You can see them dragging a cannon and women armed. Hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn. Nobody wants to make a bunch of women angry because they'll just go crazy on you. You've seen those girls fight out in the courtyard. You know it's bad. It's worse than two guys fighting. Two girls, they be pulling hair out and everything. So women angered by the price of bread march on Versailles. It scares the royal family. It scares the king. It scares Marie Antoinette, and they're forced to move back to Paris. So they're within city limits for people to get them. That's all we are going to talk about today in this video. I hope you catch me next time, where we will move on to talk about revolution bringing reform and terror. Have a great day, interweb.